Good evening and welcome everyone to our third event of this semester's GCC keynote lecture series. I'm going to share the presentation again in 1 second, but I thought it would be best to have all of our faces here seen first when we make a couple of notes of introduction. My name is Jens Kugele. I'm Head of Research Coordination and member of the Executive Board at our center, GCSC. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation during the next hour and a half on the fusion of technology and thinking, and on the tools, protocols, and formats of our daily work as scholars, specifically the textual writing formats that we are used to use in our daily work. I'm looking forward to learning from our esteemed guest speaker, Professor Marcello Vitali-Rosati, about his perspective on these topics. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, Marcello, and for joining us tonight. Many thanks also to all of you in the audience for taking the time tonight to tune in. We look forward to hearing your thoughts and comments during the Q&A session. And most of you in the audience already know that during this current winter semester, our traditional GCSE keynote lecture series continues its focus from the summer term on the role of the digital in the study of culture. We aim to shed light on the various potentials, the horizons, as well as the challenges in our exchange with experts in the field. And we're interested in a variety of interdisciplinary contexts and dimensions, such as the digital as an object of research in the study of culture, but also questions of archiving, digital research methods, consequences of the increasing digital culture for higher education teaching, legal aspects, open access, and more generally open science, university policy, data protection, and further socio-political dimensions. As in the previous semester, we attempt to make all of these events in this series as dialogue-based, multi-voiced, and dynamic as possible. And we started our conversation on the role of the digital in the study of culture in April with a lecture by Martin Eve from Birkbeck University, London, over open access publishing in the humanities. We continued the series with reflections by Professor Eric Bourne from Cornell University on technology, infrastructure, and digitalization in the context of critical university studies. In June, Professor Dorothee Birke's lecture introduced us to the topic of digital reading culture, and specifically the phenomenon of booktube. In July, then, Dr. Annette Lösecke from Bard College Berlin and Professor Katharina Lorenz from JLU Gießen shared with us some of the findings of their collaborative research on curating cultural heritage in the digital realm. And in November, Professor David Lyon's lecture on his book, Pandemic Surveillance, marked the beginning of this semester's second part of the lecture series, followed by Professor Astrid Enslin's talk on video gaming and digital culture studies. And I'm thrilled, as we are all here on the panel tonight, that we have the chance to engage in a conversation with yet another inspiring culture studies scholar in the context of our lecture series, Professor Marcello Vitali-Rosati from the University of Montreal, Canada. Just a brief note on the format of tonight's event. Before we proceed, I have the privilege of being joined today by one more panelist, Marie-Christine Boucher, one of the doctoral researchers at our center, will share some comments and questions and will help me transition our conversation into a general discussion after the lecture, where we will then invite questions and comments from all of you in the audience. In the context of this lecture series, we are using WebEx events instead of WebEx meetings, and this is mainly due to the high standard of data right protection, and WebEx events guarantees them on a different level. And as you have noticed, upon joining WebEx event, all members in the audience have their cameras switched off, the microphones muted. But to make tonight's exchange as personal and interactive as possible, we decided to assign panelist privileges to everyone in the audience right after the lecture part. This will allow you to then switch on your camera and or unmute your mic. And it will thus create a bit more, as we think, a meeting atmosphere during our discussion. During the Q&A, if you would like to pose a question or make a comment, please just enter a plus in the chat and we will be happy to add you to the list. However, if you prefer to, you may also just write out your question or comment directly in the chat and we'll be happy to read it out. Tonight's event will be recorded. The recording, however, is limited to the audio and video of our panelists, and the recording does not include chat activity or any metadata regarding the participants of this session. I would like to take this opportunity to express my thanks again to my colleague Marie-Christine Boucher for her, first of all, initial suggestion to invite Professor Vitali-Rosati, whose work is connected to her own research, but also for her help in co-conceptualizing this event and for introducing our speaker. And with that, I'm happy to hand over to you, Marie-Christine.
Thank you. Professor Marcello Vitali-Rosati is a professor at the Department of Francophone Literatures, I suppose I would translate it, at the University of Montréal, and holds the Canada Research Chair in Digital Textualities. So in this role, amongst other things, he has developed platforms for publishing online journals and monographs, and software for editing scientific article, which I think he will be presenting today, Stylo. His research deals with issues and challenges of digital technology, such as the concept of the virtual digital identity, the notions of author and authority, forms of production, the theory of editorialization, and more. He is editor of Sens Public, an international interdisciplinary journal, online journal, and also co-director of the book series Parcours Numérique, also on a similar topic, I believe. And this invitation came about, as Jens already mentioned, I think, so the Unculture editorial team, which I was a part of until recently, we were planning to invite speakers for this series on the role of the digital in the study of culture, and being an open access journal, who we were very interested in these questions of open versus proprietary platforms and formats. I think also being sort of in between as an open access journal, but still being in this part of this editorial workflow where we still depend a lot on proprietary software. So we were interested in those questions, and around the same time, Professor Vitali-Rosati and his colleague, Professor Michael Sinatra, who I believe is with us tonight. So we're very pleased for that as well. Wrote an open letter addressed to in a local newspaper in Montreal, addressed to university administrators, that was criticizing the massive move to proprietary online platforms and spaces that happened to deal with the digital needs in the wake of the pandemic, which caught our attention. And in the end, our discussions for this lecture went into different directions, but we are nonetheless very glad to have him tonight inside of our own university-provided, commercially owned online space to talk about something a little bit different. So thank you for being with us tonight and speaking.
Thank you very much, Marie-Christine. Thank you, Jens. Thank you for the invitation and for the presentation. I'm very happy to know that this letter, which had no impact on institutions, but at least it had an impact on our reflection and your reflection. So I will start with the takeover message of this lecture in order for you to be able to leave immediately after 1 minute, if and or to sleep. So the idea, the main idea, what I'm going to say is that protocols, algorithms, formats, and more generally, material arrangements, material environments are our thinking. So I want to stress, they are not just conditioning our thinking, they are our thinking. This is the point that I would like to prove. Next slide, please, Jens. So the point is to stress this very relationship and probably this identity between matter and thinking. And in order to do that, I will start with an anecdote. You will see there will be many anecdotes in my lecture. So in response to a blog post where I was trying to explain the importance of formats and writing tools, a colleague tweets, and you can, next slide, yet another who, instead of working, wastes his time playing with LaTeX. So this was the point, and it is interesting to analyze the point of view behind such reaction. So I was telling you about my my blog post, and this answer of my colleague on Twitter. So yet another who, instead of working, wastes his time playing with LaTeX. And it's very interesting to analyze this because it is really rooted. It's a way of thinking which is strongly rooted in our culture, and we could say that such an idea is in continuity with a certain interpretation of the famous Platonic criticism of writing that we can find in the Phaedrus. Plato's position on this subject has been the focus of several debates, and the most famous that you will certainly know is Derrida's in La Pharmacie de Platon. If we read Plato in the first degree, we identify an opposition between the ideality of thought, of thinking, on the one side, and on the other side, the impurity of its material inscription. So on the one hand, there is what really counts, the content, the ideas, whose purest expression is the logos. So that could pose certain questions, because logos is also the voice, so the voice is also a sort of inscription, or it is material, but it doesn't seem like that in the Phaedrus. So on the other hand, the material inscription of these ideas and this thought, which represents a form of decay. The superior purity of thought is transformed into a byproduct, a bastard, this is the word used by Plato, in a product which is imperfect because it is embodied. So writing is this bastard product. And so it is the traditional opposition between form and matter, where the latter is always a limited and imperfect manifestation of the former. And I want to stress that this opposition is also revealed in a strong way, in a very strong way, and I will talk about that, in the opposition between genders as masculine and feminine. And you can find it in Aristotle, and in particular in his treatise about the reproduction of animals, where he clearly states that so the form, the principle of movement, so the important part in the reproduction of animal is the sperm, so the male principle, and the female principle, so the egg, is just something to feed the sperm. So women just give the matter, which doesn't matter. We will come to this relationship between matter, which matters or which doesn't matter. So in this case, matter doesn't really matter because it's just food for an essence which will, in any case, develop itself in the same way. So yes, it is important to eat, but what we eat, we used to think that does not structure our very essence. It's just food. So and it's very, very important, this point, because we will find it in the following considerations. So next slide, please, and I hope that I will stay connected. So an anecdote, another anecdote, a little older than mine. It's a Porphyrian anecdote, which clearly manifests this ideology. In the life of Plotinus, so Porphyry is Plotinus is the master of Porphyry. Porphyry tells how Plotinus wrote his Enneads, so his most important work, while he was doing something else. So he was talking with other people, he was busy with other matters, and at the same time, he was writing down the complex thoughts that he had already developed. So the act of inscribing his thought on a medium was considered trivial. It had no importance in itself, and therefore no particular dignity. It is manual work, which could eventually be delegated to an individual without any skills and any competencies, who just mechanically transcribe what has already been developed. So to quote other conversation that took place around my blog post, so the relationship between Plotinus and my blog post is very strong. Somebody told me that the work of formatting and tagging the contents should be left to a secretary. So this was in French, so it was gendered, and it was une secrétaire, so a female secretary. So very interesting to stress how this has Margot Mellet, who works with me, call it little hands work, seems to be really without any importance. It's just trivial work. There is no thinking in it. Next slide, and you have a long citation of this passage of Porphyry. So I myself, Porphyry of Tyre, was one of Plotinus' very closest friends, and it was to me he entrusted the task of revising his writings. So such revision was necessary because Plotinus could not bear to go back on his work, even for one rereading. So this was in part because the condition of his sites, but it was also, and I won't read all the citation, my slides are online anyway, so if you want to check them, they are available. We can probably post the link on the chat. So the point is, he was not interested to its work. It was not an important work. So next slide, please, and we will talk especially about the relationship between women and computers. Here you can see a photograph of the Gallerates lab of Father Busa. Roberto Busa is the one. Often we refer to Roberto Busa and his work as the beginning of digital humanities. So it was at the end of the 40s, beginning of the 50s, and Father Busa decided to digitize, so to put in punch cards all the work of Thomas Aquinas. And actually this work was mostly and quite exclusively done by women. So no one of the names of these women are available today. Melissa Terras, if you click on the next slide, just to give you some names. So Melissa Terras wrote a blog post where she tried to identify these women. The photograph is really interesting. So you have a bunch of men who are just looking. So to look is the noble attitude, the good thing to do. Theory is about looking. And on the other hand, you have just one person who is actually working, and she's a woman, but it was considered like just a secretary work. You just have to punch cards. So there's nothing involved in it from a theoretical point of view. So it's really significant that in the history of computer, technical tasks have traditionally been left to women, and actually with the idea that it is not important. Isabelle Collet, that you can see the title of one of her contributions on this topic, explained how at some point, so women who were so present and so important in the work of information technologies just disappeared during the 80s and the 90s, just when the perception of information technology shifts to something valuable, to something which a symbolic value and immaterial. So in the 80s, we started talking about computers, associating them with the term virtual, so linking them with immateriality, with symbolic value, and the figure of hackers emerges, which, and as you know, hackers are mostly, not exclusively, but mostly in the collective imaginary men. So that's very interesting to stress. Next slide, please. So this dualistic ideology that sees a clear separation between form and matter, so content, thoughts, ideas, things that matter on one side and matter which doesn't matter on the other side, has a long history, and it has been the object of several analysis and criticism. So Derrida's is the best known. I was citing Derrida's La Pharmacie de Platon at the beginning. So it is a study of Plato's Phaedrus. So it's very interesting, starting from the dialogue, the Plato's dialogue, who was setting up this metaphysics of immateriality, you can call it. So Derrida speak about metaphysics of presence, but actually the other point is the relationship between materiality and immateriality, as I have shown. So actually, Derrida tries to criticize this ideology and actually to change logos with writing. So all the theory of écriture, of writing, developed by Derrida, was a critic of this ideology of immateriality. But at the same time, however, it has never really been outdated, this kind of dualistic approaches. It is still there, and perhaps also in the works of those who have tried hardest to criticize it. And if you think about Derrida, actually, he himself ends up replacing the concept of logos with a rather immaterial idea of writing and text. At least, I'm not sure about Derrida's work, but if you think about Derrida's doxa, so the reception of Derrida's work, actually the idea of text which emerges from this kind of theory is quite immaterial. Everything is text. There's nothing outside text. Il n'y a pas de hors texte. And then all the work about intertextualities by Kristeva, for example, actually, and Derrida explaining that text is not books. So text is not actually material, is itself something which escape to the material world. So I repeat, it's not what Derrida says, but it's how some of his thinking has been interpreted and reused after him, and in a kind of a post-structuralist doxa, this idea of text is quite immaterial. So next slide, please. And I just cite the La Pharmacie de Platon, and then the next one where we come to Karen Barad. You can see Karen Barad on the slide, and the next one, please. So the renewed interest in materiality. So I'm not the only one interested in materiality here. Actually, there are many works today working on this topic, and so it's what has been called the new materialism, new materialisms, or new materialism wave. So it seems to promise different paths. One must think about the materiality of writing, or better, thinking is only this materiality, as I was saying at the beginning of the lecture. So there are many forms of new materialism. Please, next slide. I just show a paper by Gamble, Hannah, and Neil, what is new materialism, which is an état de l'art. So it explains all the kinds of new materialism. And actually, I quite agree with their analysis, because they say that Karen Barad approach is the most interesting one. So I completely agree with this analysis. So there are many forms of new materialism, but I agree with Gamble, Hannah, and Neil to think that Karen Barad's is the most interesting and most developed form of it. In order to understand the depth of Barad's proposal, it is useful to look at a physical experiment imaged by Bohr. So Karen Barad, at the beginning, he's a physicist and a quantum physicist. This is first specialization, and then she's. I think she goes like it's they. They think that they are a philosopher after physicists. So this is a very interesting experiment that Barad explains. So Barad takes the philosophy of Bohr, what they call philosophy physics of Bohr, and analyze it in order to explain this very relationship between matter and meaning, and this is what leads her to say matter matters and to explain it. So I beg your pardon for this long parenthesis that I will do about something which I'm not a specialist of at all. So I hope I won't say crazy and foolish things. So it's a parenthesis based on the work of Karen Barad. So I'm explaining their thought. It's not mine. It's not mine interpretation of quantum physics. I won't be able to do that. It's Karen Barad's. So next slide, please. So all starts with this very famous double-slit experiment, next slide, which was realized for the first time in 1801 by Thomas Young. The idea of the experiment is to answer a very simple, apparently, question. Is the light a wave or a set of particles? So, the experiment is actually used to determine whether the phenomenon being analyzed is a wave or a particle, and Young used it to demonstrate that light behaves like a wave. So the experiment consists in sending a beam of light to a support with two slits, as you can see in the picture. I guess that in the next slide, if you can change it, yes, you can see it better. So now, let's imagine what happens if we throw against these two slits something like some baseballs. So we expect that we will find, so some balls will pass through the one slit and some balls to the other one, and so we expect to find in the screen behind these two slits two lines where we will find the most important distribution of balls. So this is what we expect if we deal with the particles, so with something like a ball. Next slide. So if we throw something different, for example, a light source, but let's imagine we throw waves, water waves. So what we expect that, as you can see in the picture, we expect that some waves pass through one slit, some other from the other, and actually they will interfere the one with the other, and they will produce what you can see here, an interference pattern. Next slide, you can see how it works with water. So this is what you see if you produce two waves, and these two waves are interfering one each other. So what happens? This is the interesting point. So this Jung tried it with light, and actually it shows that light behaves like a wave. So you can see the interference pattern after that. So, however, if we carry out the experiment by throwing electrons against the two slits, the result is really, I mean, I wrote surprising, but it's crazy. It's really crazy. So the electrons, which would seem to be similar to small balls, so little particles, do not behave like particles, but like waves, and they produce an interference pattern. It seems that electrons interfere with each other. So let's try to understand what is going on. So we can find a trick. I guess you can put on the next slide. Yes, so we can find a trick, and this is the trick imagined by Bohr. We can throw the electrons one by one first, thus preventing them from interacting with each other. So they tried also to send them one, then wait a week and send another one. So in order to be sure that there is no possible interference. But again, the final results are surprising. Each electron arrives, in fact, at a precise point of the screen, as expected. But if we look at the pattern produced at the end, after having launched separately all the electrons and at an important distance of time between one another, we find an interference pattern. So it's like crazy. Since the electrons are thrown one by one, they cannot interfere with each other. So it's impossible. So it seems that they interfere with themselves. So it seems that each electron passes through both slits and interferes with itself, which is crazy, but okay, let's imagine that. What we can do. These are the results. So little parenthesis. This experiment was first a Gedanken experiment. So just imagined by Bohr. And it was realized, so during the 20s, I think. And it was realized because at the time of Bohr, it was not possible. They didn't have the technology to do that. But it was realized, and it gives exactly the results expected by Bohr during the 90s. So this is interesting. So to verify this strange idea, one electron interfering with itself, we can modify the device. So as you see in the picture on the right, this was the idea of Bohr, in such a way that we are able to observe through which slit an electron passes. So the idea is a which path experiment. So we have to modify the device which we have made to observe this phenomenon, because in the first device we were not able to establish from which path the electrons pass. So we have to modify, this is very important. So we have to modify slightly, so in a very little way, just in order to be able, you can think about it like, okay, put an eye on the slit and just observe where it passes. And so we modify a little bit the device in order to be able to measure from which path the electron passes. And the experiment is identical to the previous one, except for this little detail. And still a surprising result awaits us. The interference pattern disappears. So we just did the same thing, but at the end, the electron is behaving like a particle. Why that? Next slide, please. So that's what Karen Barad says. Bohr argued that if we were to perform a two-slit experiment with a which path device, what I just explained, which can be used to determine which slit each electron goes through on its way to the detecting screen, we would find that the interference pattern is destroyed. That is, if a measurement is made that identifies that electron as a particle, as it is the case when we use the which part detector, then the result will be a particle pattern, not a wave pattern that results when the original unmodified two-slits apparatus is used. So next slide, please. What is the conclusion about that? So there are many discussions about, is this an epistemological problem or an ontological problem? Is this a problem about our way of knowing the world, or is it a problem about the world itself? So Bohr and Barad think that the world is made like that. So it's ontological. It's the difference between the indeterminacy principle stated by Bohr, and the principle as it is understood by Heisenberg, who thinks that it's just that we cannot see it, so it's just epistemological. So the conclusion, Bohr's conclusion and Barad's conclusion, is that the concept of particle and the concept of wave do not exist outside specific apparatuses which allowed to understand them. So there is no particle in the universe. There is a particular setting which make it possible to think the concept of a wave or the concept of particle. So the electron isn't a particle and it isn't a wave. The phenomenon of the electron passing in a which path apparatus is a particle, and an electron passing in a non-which apparatus is a wave. So actually, there is not something like concepts and then specific physical arrangements that are able to grasp them. Actually, concepts are specific physical arrangements. So next slide, please. So what Barad states is Bohr's argument for the indeterminable nature of measurement interactions is based on his insight that concepts are defined by the circumstances, so the material circumstances required for their measurement. That is, theoretical concepts, theoretical is important here, are not ideational in character. They are specific physical arrangement. That is the point that I wanted to make with this quantum mechanics parenthesis. I hope it is clear, and I think it's very important to underline that according to Barad and to Bohr, it is an ontological question. So it's not that we cannot understand some concepts outside some specific physical arrangements. Concepts do not exist outside specific physical, so material arrangements. Concepts are not just conditioned by, as I was saying at the beginning of this lecture, so it's not just that our thinking is conditioned by the environment where it emerges. Our thinking is the specific physical arrangements where it takes place. So now I'm not thinking actually, I'm what the meaning which emerges during this lecture is the result of a specific physical arrangement in which there are people, there are protocols, algorithms, WebEx playing in it, and places and stuff like that. And the meaning emerging from this lecture is not my thought, like Plotinus was thinking. So I thought the concepts here, and then I deliver it to you with a delivery channel which is neutral and not important. No, it's not at all like that. My thinking didn't exist without this specific arrangement. Next slide, please. So this it's what leads Karen Barad to say matter matters. So it matters in the sense that it produces meaning. Meaning is the result of matter. Meaning is matter. There's no meaning outside matter. There is nothing which matters more than matter. Matter, it's all that matters. So that's the point. And next slide. And I didn't talk about writing for now, so I want to talk about it a little bit. So what about writing? Okay, it's writing is one. We can focus on some particular physical arrangements. The problem is, and Barad is aware of that, actually, where does the physical apparatus end? I mean, okay, in order for a concept to emerge, there are many things involved. like I was saying before. So here we have protocols, we have WebEx, we have a connection which doesn't work very well at the University of Montreal. We have the University of Montreal. We have Jens and Marie-Christine and me and atoms and protons and stuff like that. So and writings, actually texts. There is Karen Barad book which has an important role in all of that. There are experiments, and so where does it stop? So actually it doesn't. We just have to focus on something, and in order for concepts to emerge, we have to focus on a specific defined physical arrangement. So now we can focus on writing as some specific environments, some specific physical and material arrangements from which thought and thinking can emerge. So writing, what's writing? So everything is about, we can identify something which we can name tools, protocols, so way of doing things, algorithms, formats like text formats, for example, and say that all these things actually think. I underline again, they do not just condition the thinking, they are thinking. So how do they think, and what do they think? So they have the same characteristic that rely electrons with the apparatus that we have seen before. So some particular device, a Git repository, HTML or docx, TCP/IP, HTTP, Markdown, TXT, syntax rules in different languages, tools and algorithms. What I'm saying now and what is written in a text that I'm looking at, so all these things are the material arrangements which produces thinking. So let's focus on one particular arrangement, physical arrangement that produces writing, which is very central in our world. Very sad about that, but it's like that. So next slide, please. And this is word. So Marie-Christine told that we had a discussion about proprietary software and free software. So this is one point. So if physical arrangements think, actually it is important to know who owns these specific arrangements. So this is one point about Word. So it is proprietary, but it's not the only one. Next slide, please. Many works have been done on Word. I just cite two of them, a blog post which is very, very interesting, but in French, En finir avec Word, which tells the history of how it was developed and why and so on. And then a very well-known text by Kirschenbaum, Track Changes, which is a literary history of word processing. So he analyzes how this particular word processor was used in literature by author in literature, and how it conditioned. This is what Kirschenbaum says, literary practices. So this is an important thing. So next slide, please. And just in order to understand how Word thinks, we can do a little and very brief history of word processors. Starting, so what is very strange at the beginning is that actually computers are not made for writing. Computer, as the word says, are made for computing. So why do you want to write with something which is made for making calculations? So this was a very strange idea. Actually, you don't write with something which is made in order to compute. So at the beginning, what you write on a computer was code. But actually, writing code presupposes another important practice, which is document it. So you write the code and then you document it. And at the beginning, the coders used to write the code on the computer, and at the side they had a typewriter where they typed the documentation. Because the idea was that the documentation should be printed and readable, and you don't read on a computer with very, very tiny screens, black and difficult to see, and so on. So you need paper. So at the beginning, so 1976, Michael Schreier, that you can see in the picture, developed electric pencil. The idea was you have an environment where you can write code and then write the documentation and then print it. 79, Easy Writer, developed by a very interesting person, so John Thomas Draper, alias Captain Crunch, because he was in prison actually when he developed Easy Writer because of phone hacking. He used the whistle that you can find in the Crunch serial in order to have free phone calls, because the tone of the whistle enables to become administrator of the phone, so you can phone. So this is very interesting, because hacking is trying to understand what are the principles that make something working. So what is the world vision that is behind? So how it works means what kind of theoretical principles are behind it. So it is a theoretical analysis, actually, if you think about Bohr and his Gedanken experiments, it's the same thing. So Easy Writer was the second one, and then WordStar, some of you, the older one, will probably remember WordStar 79, and WordStar was very important because it implemented something which was crazy before, the concept of page, which is completely unuseful in a digital environment. But remember, this was made for printing. So for home computers, I put a date there. There's not a date for home computers, and it's mostly the 70s, not the 80s. But 1984, as you know, is the year of the very famous Apple advertising, which 84 is a year very important because many home started buying computers. So computers come in the houses, and people begin to realize, okay, I can write with that. This is not a crazy idea. Actually, you can write with that. And 83 is the date Word was launched in the market. So this is important in order to understand how it was developed. So please, next slide. What are the principles? Here you can see just an unzip of a Word document where the little red sign marks. It was a document made by Antoine Fauché, by the way, who is working with me. And actually, he just wrote on the document, bonjour. And these are 4 of the many documents produced by Word. So what's the principle behind that? What is the worldview produced by Word? What's Word thinking? Next slide, please. So the important thing to understand and to stress is that Word was basically thought for office work. So this is the important point. So it is used to write reports, internal office documents, letters. The format letter is important here. All these documents are obviously not designed to be published. So it's not an issue. So it is linked with this history of printing. Why? Because we need to read it immediately. So it's just an internal piece of document that we need to be able to read, and we don't have screen to read. So it's not that easy to read on screen. So we need to print it. So all these documents are meant to be internal, but they must be printed so that co-workers can read them. So we are thinking to office work, and we are thinking to specific sets of work, of office work. So we have some people working in the same office, and they have to share information, and so they need to they used to have secretaries typing this information, and then this information is available like that, but actually we can use a computer to do exactly the same thing. So the graphic interface is important because it should reproduce exactly the format that we are using for that particular purpose. But this format comes from the typewriter and from other constraints that don't exist anymore. But because we are copying this model, we reproduce them. So the idea of page, for example. So printing is always the goal. The office is the point. Another interesting thing is the relationship, so the identity between format, in this case, doc at the beginning and then docx after the huge pressure of the community, because doc was a binary format, so it was impossible to read outside Word. But so they shift to docx, which is an XML format, which made it possible for other word processors to read the format. But actually, the idea is there is an identity between the format and a software, so Word and docx, where actually normally it's not the case. So you have a format, and then you can have whatever tool you like. It's wonderful. Yes, next slide is perfect. I should go a little quicker because we lost some time, and I'll try to end in 10 minutes. Is it okay, Jens? Jens, okay, wonderful. 10 minutes. So what are the effects of these ideas? So the first one, next slide, the principle of what you see is what you get, and this idea of disintermediation, which is a fake idea. So you have the feeling there's no intermediate between you writing and the final result, because you can see it. But actually there are many mediations, the mediation of the format, the mediation of the software, the mediation of the paper format, which is chosen and which is recommended passively, but actually recommended by the software. So and this principle of WYSIWYG determines a confusion between structuring and formatting. To facilitate the reading and processing of an article or a book, it is necessary to dissociate the semantic value of the fragments from their graphic rendering. For example, a level 2 title and its graphic rendering in a large font size. So what does WYSIWYG is that there is a confusion between structuring, semantically structuring a content, and formatting, graphically formatting, which was okay in the typewriter environment because formatting was the only way to structure, but which is kind of crazy in a digital environment where formatting is not at all structuring. So you can structure with some markup, you can structure the content, and then you can care after how this structure is formatted, and so how it is graphically rendered. So the second, this is the first thing, and so it's not bad in itself. It's bad according to what you want to do with it. So what are we doing when we write? What are we writing? This is the point. So second point, the syntax is hidden. It is thus impossible to know what is going on. The software decides about the meaning, and that's what you have seen in the picture with all the files Word produces. So it produces a lot of stuff, a lot of text, a lot of meaning, but actually this meaning we know nothing about that. We don't know anything about that. It is produced by the software. So this have many little determines many little glitches also. They're not the most important thing, but they are there. For example, if you format something and then you delete it, you can leave a blank space with the formatting, and you cannot see it. It's impossible to change it because actually you don't see it. So there is some syntax which is hidden and impossible to change. This is why at the end a docx file bugs, because there is many information which is not used that you are not able to manage and to see and to change. So this is the other problem. The docx format does not allow, so third point, the docx format does not allow a scientific structuring of contents. So if you want to write papers, scientific papers, Words is kind of the worst tool ever, because actually it's not conceived for that. So the contents produced in docx are poorly marked up and difficult to access, as they are poorly indexed. So at the time where there is a huge production of texts, it becomes crucial that documents are correctly structured to improve their indexing and to allow their query by advanced search tools. And we are not thinking about that. So Words is producing the meaning of the future on some basis which we don't share actually as academics. Now I'm talking about academic writing. So the problem is not Word. The problem is that there is an incompatibility between the Word views that stands behind our work as academics and the Word view which is produced by Word. So editors, fourth point, editors are obliged to do a long and tedious work of reworking texts in order to reintroduce semantic layer and to correct the numerous and errors introduced by this word processor. So there is, we make the work as editors, we make and publishers, we make the work many times, and actually we completely lost the lose the link between the initial writing and the final meaning, because it's lost in translation. Actually, it's lost in the specific environment, which does not allow to take track of the initial meaning. So the scientific structure of thinking at the beginning cannot be implemented in the format, so it just doesn't exist as the electron, which cannot be a particle if you don't have a which path device. It's the same thing. So the durability of documents in docx format depends on Microsoft's willingness to maintain this the proprietary format. This is another thing. So, however, durability is not the mission and priority of a company. So there is no guarantee that content in docx format will be accessible in the future, and that you know it if you used to write with WordStar during the 90s. Actually, all my stuff written in WordStar is not accessible anymore, and I mean I've written it 25 years ago, not a century ago. So we can read Aristotle, but we cannot read something we wrote 25 years ago. So, but the most serious problem, the most serious thing here is that writing and thinking become a single homogeneous activity. We all think the same way. The problem is not only how Word thinks, it's that there is just Word which thinks. There are not any other models. We are, every one of us, not everyone, but most of us are using that. So there is only one way of thinking. So, and actually not only we are all using it, but we are all using it for all the activities possible. We are using it to, we think the same way in all our activities, whether we are writing a love letter, a shopping list, a scientific paper in physics or in literature, a novel or some notes during a lecture or during a class. Actually, we think in the same way for all these activities, which was not the case in the paper model, because there were different specific material arrangements according to the activities. You don't write a shopping list in the same way you write a scientific paper when you are on paper, so before Word and before the computer. So next one, please. So what I propose is that we should think each time before starting to write to create our own writing environment. And this not once for all, but each time that we start writing. Here in the background of the slide, you can see a specific writing arrangements that I produced for a particular project which name is Methodology toward Pre-Human Thinking, on which I'm working on. And actually, I create the format. So the idea is to make the text I write interact with a series of sources. So I tried to imagine a data structure to allow this dialogue. So classic sources, for example, Aristotle or Plato or whatever, and then the text I write. And each source, so what I needed from each source has determined the format I use to structure this source. So I use YAML, which is just a simple metadata format, and I structure the data in some ways. So each source, each quotation is written in YAML, and it is accompanied by a series of metadata like the author's date of birth, the title, and the author's place of birth. This then allows me to see what I'm quoting. And I use the Jupyter Notebook, for example, to visualize my sources on a map based on the birthplace of each author. And this allowed me to see how Eurocentric I was. And so it changed the way I looked for references, saying, okay, I shouldn't be there. Actually, the possibility, the structure of the data and the format of the data changed my readings, and so changed completely the text. So this is the format is the thinking. So here I use Zotero, and then I use a HTML output, and then I use Vim to write because I like it, and because it implies some particular way of writing and thinking. And then I use Jupyter Notebooks in order to visualize some data I produced writing when I was writing, and so on. So, and this is so what I think it's important is each time we should create a particular writing environment. It can be very simple. For example, it can be just a piece of paper and the pen. I mean, this is a wonderful way of writing, and I can organize my piece of papers in some way that they help what I want my thinking to be. So this is the point. Next slide, and I finish very quickly now. So we tried to implement this particular idea. I don't think it is the only one, but what we tried to do with Stylo. So this is, you can use it at this URL. It's a free online text editor, and it's an editor conceived in order to write papers in human science. So the idea was trying to implement a particular way of writing, a particular way of thinking. So not a general universal model as Word would want to be, but a model answering a very particular need. And I should add, this particular need, which is expressed by me and my team. I mean, so it's not universal. Probably Jens writes in another way. And actually, to be quite frank, I don't use Stylo because it does not correspond exactly to what I want to do. But I mean, we tried to build it in order to represent, to make it possible, like the Which Path apparatus, to make it possible a particular way of writing papers in human science. So next slide, please. what are the basic principles of stylo? So to take advantage of the semantic skills of the author. The author, when he's writing, they are writing, actually they know something about their text. They know, okay, this is a date, this is a name, this is an important name, this is a definition, this is a concept, this is an example, and so on. So they have semantic skills about the text, and we want to take advantage of them. We want them to be able to express these competencies. So give the author back control over the structure and semantic of the text. And we try to make an editor, the next slide, which is at the same time simpler, so with a clear interface, with fewer options, because Word has a lot of options, which determines the way we think with it. And fewer features than a word processing tool like Word. Then next slide, please. And at the same time, richer. So the possible of marking up contents, the possible of managing the bibliographic contents, so using Zotero or other formats to manage structured bibliographic content, which is very important in human science. I mean, our science is a science about text, so the capability of citing this text in a correct way is actually the strong part of our scientificity. We are scientific because we are able to cite documents. Humanities are science about text, so about this kind of document. So expressing rich metadata and having at the end multiple exports. And next slide. And the possibility of semantics. So the idea is not what you see is what you get, but what you see is what you mean. So putting the semantics before everything. Next slide, please. And so it's a modular application. Here I don't want to comment on all of this because it's a little late, but the idea is to use many different components and to put them together in order for Stylo to be open. I mean, Stylo is not a format. Stylo is just a tool putting together a lot of standards that you can use in other environments in order for the writer, the author, to be able to shift from a writing environment to another, getting the information, getting the control of the information. So I use Stylo, I share a paper with Marie-Christine, and then I use it on Vim, and I use it on other text editors, and then I use Zotero, and then I use LaTeX, and you can do whatever you want. So this kind of fluidity was an important thing for us, and the fact to not be obliged to maintain all these modules because actually we are a university lab, so the perennity of our existence is not assured. So that's the presentation of Stylo. And the last slides, please. The takeaway message is by Voltaire. Next slide. And the end of Candide. So all this is very well answered, Candide, but let us cultivate our garden. And I think that's what it means to create its own writing, our own writing environment. That is what it means to take care about specific physical and material arrangements, which, as I said at the beginning of the lecture, are our thinking. Thank you very much, and excuse me, I was too long.
Thank you very much indeed, Marcello. You were not too long at all, and it was a sheer joy. Thank you very much for this introduction, I think, to a lot of tools, a lot of sets of questions, I think, that at least were very, very enriching to me, listening to it, but also the build-up and your comments on materiality and questions that matter in our daily work, to use the one pun you have been making, but also the invitation to cultivation and gardening that matters in the world of tools that we are using. Very enriching, a lot of food for thought. And if you agree, I would like to unshare the presentation real quick so we can maybe have a better view for everyone in the audience, and maybe start transitioning our lecture part into a question and answer part, if that's all right with you. And Marie-Christine and I, we thought, since you are, part of a team and yourself also very much involved in developing some of those tools you mentioned, and you are also heavily using some of those tools, I was going to invite you, if you would like to elaborate on some of the tools you have been mentioning, and some of them you have been involved in developing them, like Stylo, but some others you have been mentioning were particularly interesting to me personally, not having heard of them, at least myself, and sorry for my ignorance. But VIM you have been mentioning, for example, Stylo, of course, which you have been involved in, and I guess is more known, but YAML and others. I mean, maybe, for example, VIM, could you help us understand what you find particularly interesting and helpful in using it, for example, and how does it allow you to think, as you say, also outside of the not only conditions, right, as you said, but the sheer materiality of thinking that Word would force you basically to produce?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. Actually, first of all, I like very much to change environments, to experiment with different environments. This is something I like very much. So I'm not stuck with one tool. It has been, I think, 3 or 4 years since I'm using Vim. Actually, it's a tool which is made. So it's a very powerful text editor which has no graphic interface. So it's you cannot use the mouse. It's just the keyboard, and it's highly customizable. So you can add plugins as you want, and you really can set up your environment as you like. So this is what I like very much, is not to have the mouse, which is a way of stay focused on the keyboard, and which is a strange way of dealing with text, just using text. So when you change, so you have different modes in Vim. For example, you have an insert mode, so you can write, and you have a visual mode, you can select and copy and paste. And actually, in order to shift from this mode, you have to use letters. So you push on the I, and you shift to the insert environment. You push on the V, and you shift to the visual environment. So actually, letters are at the same time a part of what you are writing and a part of your interaction with the text. So this is a very interesting way of writing for me. And actually, it is the other point is that you use it in a terminal, which allows you to see the text. Actually, I think to see the text, there are many other ways to do it. So VS Codium, for example, VS Codium, or whatever new coding environment allows to have a terminal implemented in the environment. But what I like about Vim, it is in the terminal. So there is a continuity between writing and manipulating in a computational way your text. So I'm able to shift from writing something and then to use it in order to do something. I use Python because it's simple, and I like it. Before I was another way is to using Bash, so just the basic terminal language in order to manipulate tests. So YAML is a way of structuring metadata. So for example, it's a very simple syntax. So it's a format allowing to structure data as you want, just with a very, very simple key value structure. So for example, title, the factory of thinking, author, Jens Kugel, and then date, whatever, and so on. So, and what is interesting, it's very simple, and you can imagine your own data structure easily adapting the syntax to your own needs. So if you need, I don't know, birthplace, you just have to add the key. So it's text, birthplace, 2 dots, and then you whatever you want. And this allow then, if you use a basic parser, like in Python, you can use this data in order to do whatever you want. Actually, there is one key tool that I didn't talk about, but which is very important also for Stylo, because we use it for Stylo, is pandoc. So what is very interesting about pandoc is a text converter. The idea is you can shift from any format you want to any format you want. The two more important formats are the Markdown, which is a standard simplification of HTML, and then HTML. But you can transform using pandoc texts from Markdown to LaTeX, to PDF, to docx if you really like it, and so on. What is interesting about pandoc that it was made by a guy who is professor of philosophy in a US university. So what is interesting is, so he writes the code, and it's very interesting that he completely fits my needs. And actually, I can see why. I mean, it was produced by a guy who makes the same thing as I do. So it really is useful to me. And actually, it uses Markdown and YAML, for example, and other formats, but you can have your YAML. For example, the slides that you were sharing, my slides, are made in Markdown, and I have a little YAML at the beginning, and then I use pandoc in order to produce a reveal.js framework, which is an HTML. So it's a JavaScript library able to show slides in an HTML format. So, but I was using Vim and YAML, Markdown, and pandoc in order to do that. So, and this completely changed. Actually, the idea of using the backgrounds, for example, of slides in this way comes from reveal.js, which allows this kind of practice. So, and actually, my lecture was, and often my classes and when I speak with slides are very structured on this particular way of writing slides. So it's just few examples of tools, but I would say that so most important things in my way of writing, what doesn't change that much are formats like Markdown, YAML, and the text converter like and BibTeX for bibliography, and then a text converter like pandoc. And starting from that, then I use different kinds of environments for specific projects, and I adapt my environments to specific needs or specific ambitions.
Thank you very much for the elaborations.